Hello everyone, my name is Mike Verspril. Welcome to my channel, and for today's video I'm going to edit some images that were sent to me by some photographers involving the night sky and some issues they're having with trees. Now the first set of images, this was taken with a star tracker, and you could see that the foreground trees are starting to elongate and get blurry, and that's what happens, when you use a star tracker. Your foreground gets blurry because it's counteracting the rotation of the Earth. And then he took a long exposure of the foreground just to brighten it up. And he has a bunch of hot pixels, so I'll show you guys how to get rid of that. But his biggest problem was blending the trees because these spread out a further distance and it's harder to hide them. So I'll show you guys how to overcome that issue. Now this is a little bit more tedious, so I'm actually going to save this for last. We're going to jump over to this other set of images because this is actually very easy and only takes about a minute. So right here we have the lit tree under the starry sky, and then the photographer took a series of photos to create a nice star trail. Now fortunately for us, he left it on the tripod in the same position, so blending this is actually very easy and we don't even have to create a mask. So that's a great thing, and let me just jump back to this tree. Now one thing I would recommend though is try experimenting with your light and hitting it from different angles just to kind of add a little bit more contrast to this tree. It might make it a little bit more interesting, but nevertheless this should work fine for what we're trying to do. So I'm going to select both these images and go to Photo, Edit in, Open as layers in Photoshop. Now that we have the two images in Photoshop, you don't even have to create a mask or anything like that. All we have to do is change the blend mode, so click right here. And then you want to use either screen or lighten. And this is going to allow anything that is bright to show through. So now we have the lit up tree and the lights of the night sky. Now I think it's off a little bit, so if I zoom in here, yeah, there's probably a little bit of camera shake when he took the foreground shot. So we could always, adjust this layer and move it around to make it fit a little bit better. All right, that's not too bad. And then what I would do is just crop out this bottom section right here, or you could try and fill it and clone in some of this grassy area. So that's it. That's how quick and easy this is. And for those of you that are using Affinity, you can do the same thing, just bring your images into the program Affinity, and it also has a drop down menu right here, and it has lighten, screen, they both work. There's a couple other options that might work as well, negation. So just play around with the blending modes and find one that works best for your photos, but as you can see, it's very easy. So that's one set of images done, so now let's get back to the more complex set of images. Alright, so we're back in Lightroom with the other two photos, and before I bring them into Photoshop, I just want to do some minor adjustments just to kind of help make my life a little bit easier when I go to blend them together. So this first one, I'm going to just brighten a little bit, and I want to bring down the highlights. There's a decent amount of light pollution back by this mountain range, so I'm going to lower that. Alright, that looks alright, and jump to the other photo. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to bring down the highlights. There's a decent amount of haze over here in this tree line. So I'm going to take a brush, lower my shadows to around, let's say 35. Just paint along the tree line. And this is going to help create separation of the trees from the sky. So when I go, mask them out, it's going to be a little bit easier for the software to detect the difference between the two. And we'll take care of these hot pixels a little bit later. You know what, let me lower the shadows overall just a little bit. Okay, and I just want to warm this up a hair. Alright, that looks pretty good, so let's bring them into Photoshop by going to Edit in, Open as layers in Photoshop. Alright, now I just want to make a copy of each image. That way if I make any mistakes, I still have my original 2 photos. Alright, so now what we need to do is start to clone out some of these tree branches. So let me zoom in here. And also probably part of this mountain. So that way when we go to take this sky and blend it with this image, the stars will be behind these trees and it just won't be a blurry mess. Now one thing I would recommend in the future is try and use stacking software for a scenario like this if you don't want to deal with cloning out all these trees. Typically I like to use star trackers if it's a little bit more of an open area, or if I use a star tracker I'll actually try and capture more of the sky and less of the horizon. That way I could always lower the sky a little bit more and kind of hide it behind my foreground horizon. So it's just something to take note in the future. But luckily we have Photoshop so we could salvage this picture. So let's get started by going to the clone tool and make my selection. Oh, I'm at 51%. Let me make that 100%. And we're just going to start painting away these trees. Now just be careful with the clone tool. Sometimes it might change the color of the sky. Now I'm going to speed this up a little bit so you don't have to see me clone out all these trees. Alright, so I know it looks like a mess right now, but that's okay because eventually it's going to have these trees in place of where it's a little blotchy. Another cool thing that I like to use with the new Photoshop 2020 is their updated warp tool, because sometimes I'll use the warp tool to lower my horizon a little bit. So let me just show you guys that really quick. So go to Edit, Transform, Warp, and if we zoom out, go back to Edit, Transform, Split Warp. They have horizontal, vertical, or crosswise. We're going to do vertical, and we're going to place that right here. I'm going to do another one. And then I'm going to do 2 horizontals, and we're going to isolate this mountain area and just kind of lower that a little bit. You'll see. So put it right about here. And I'll put one right about here. And now it's not going to stretch the sky above it. I'm only going to stretch below this line right here. So it's pretty cool what they did with the warp tool, because now you can really isolate where you want to warp. You're not warping like the whole image, you're just doing a part of it. You could also twist it. It's pretty neat. So it's a pretty sweet upgrade that they did, and I'm really enjoying it, and you could definitely utilize it to kind of help out in certain scenarios like this. All right, just hit enter when you're done. So there we go, there's our sky layer, and now we want to blend it with our foreground layer. So I'm actually going to bring my foreground to the top, create a layer mask, make sure we have black selected, grab a brush, and I want the hardness at 100%, opacity at 100%, and I'm going to start painting away. I'm hitting the backslash key just to check, make sure I didn't miss anything with my mask, and that looks pretty good. Now what we want to do is right click on my layer mask, go to select a mask. we're going to refine it by painting over this tree line. It's not doing anything yet until I let go of the mouse button. And zoom in and fix any areas that you need to. Now you're gonna have to play around with the global refinements to really dial this in and get it to your liking. But typically I keep my contrast around 15 to 25. And then I'll shift the edge into the negative just to kind of hide some of the glow that's typically around tree branches. And you could also do decontaminate colors. This also helps if there's some like color fringing with the tree branches, so you can mess around with that. Just don't go too high, it starts to get really like blotchy. So I try and keep that on the lower end. Keep it around 25%. And once you like it, just hit OK. Alright, so there we have it. It blended pretty nicely. I could probably blend it a little bit better if I refine those details a little bit more and also darken some of these trees a little bit. But I want to save some time and go over these hot pixels really quick. So let me take this layer and drag it down. And I want to merge it with my sky layer now that I'm happy. So merge down. Only do that once you're, satisfied with everything. And now I want to make a copy of that layer. And what I want to do is go to Filter, Noise, Dust and Scratches. And I'm going to reset it. I already was playing around earlier to get a really good threshold and radius. But typically I start with 1 to 2 radius for the pixels. Now these pixels were a little bit bigger, so I had to go up to 4 pixels to get rid of them. Now as you see, it starts to get rid of a lot of detail in the trees, in your stars, and everywhere else. So what we have to do is bring the threshold back up. And you just want to go nice and slow. It's going to start bringing back detail, but if you go too much, it's also going to start bringing back a lot of the hot pixels. So keep going until your details come back and you don't have too many hot pixels. So 40 looks pretty good. Obviously we still lost some stars, so I'm going to bring those back. That's why I made a copy of this layer. But you can see the detail in the rocks and the trees seem to be fine. Now there's a couple hot pixels that missed. We'll have to clone those out, but there's only a few, so you don't have to do a crazy amount of work. So hit OK. Now with this copy layer underneath that has the hot pixels, I'll turn it on and off, and I'll just check to make sure that I didn't lose detail in something important. Now it seems to be just the hot pixels that are gone, which is what we want. Sometimes you get an object in the foreground that gets a little soft from doing this technique, so you might have to paint the detail back in, just like we have to paint the stars back in. So I'll show you guys how to do that by creating a layer mask. And grab a brush. You could change the hardness to 0%. Put the opacity at 100%. And you're just gonna start painting back your stars. And I painted some hot pixels back in by accident, so I could just go over here and just change it to white, and that's going to paint them away. Alright, that looks pretty clean. Now for anything that the dust and scratches didn't pick up, just clone out. But as you can see, I didn't have to spend a gazillion hours trying to get rid of all these hot pixels. I just did that dust and scratches and fine-tuned it, so I kept the detail of my foreground, but was able to remove all of those hot pixels. So it's a great tool to use on those, but just be careful with your stars because it will remove those as well. Some people like to do that and kind of focus on dust clouds, but that's a whole nother story. So hopefully this helps you guys out in the future for anybody that runs into a similar problem. Thank you so much for watching. Check out their Instagrams below. I'll leave them in the description. So thank you guys so much. Take care. Bye-bye. Hey you. Yeah, you. Before you leave, please hit that like and subscribe button. Also, if you want to support this channel, please check out my affiliate links down below. It's what I use and recommend. And lastly, be sure to follow me on Instagram where you can see pictures that I post when I travel for inspiration, and I sometimes do free giveaways. So check it all out. Thanks and goodbye.